All right, and welcome to the Play Big podcast, where we're talking with people who play big in life and in business and in money. And I'm excited to have Tamra Andress here with me today, a international speaker, a multiple best-selling author of multiple books. Was it 5 or 6 best-selling
we're going on
books?
6 this week.
6 this week. Congratulations.
Thank you.
A number one top podcaster in the world, one of the top 1% of all podcasters in the world, and an entrepreneur, wife, mother, and I'm excited to have you here. But who is Tamra? Tell us a little about who Tamra is.
Honestly, even as you were saying, play big, I'm like, oh man, because expansion is really something I'm passionate about. And so I'm excited to be able to share that even with people today, is that we often get stuck in our own head of thinking too small. And I was living a life where I was actually kind of the audience of one, which we might hear associated to our faith now. But I was really just in a space of being stuck in my life. And I felt like everything that I was doing was in selfish intent. And yet I was 29, so I say that I had a quarter life crisis, and I hopefully don't have a midlife crisis. But at the time, I was really looking to self as the way in which I would show up to everything. And it was the American dream that I knew that I needed to quit, and yet it had been so conceptualized in my life that I needed a breath. And if we think about breath and who that is and how that is connected to our expansion, it's living in the present moment and not going after anything outside of what our intentional purpose of life is. So when someone asks me who I am now and I think about expansion, I think about play. I think about just being excited for life and really living in joy. And what does that look like? Associated to playing big is really, I think, letting go of our own inhibitions and starting to risk bigger, connected to creative experiences.
And when did, at age 29, so what was happening around your life at that moment in time when, this realization came to you?
Yeah. So I was playing in big to the context of what the world and culture expects us to play big in. So I had already, at this point, I was 29, had 9 different businesses that I'd cultivated at that point in my life, 2 of which were taking all of my time. I was working about 70 hours a week. And even when I wasn't working, I had my phone right next to me and the dollar signs were dinging. And I was really zoned in on success instead of sustenance. And that, too, wasn't even a wherewithal. I had no idea. If you think about the Jim Carrey movie, The Mask, where he can't get the mask off, I was that person wearing this mask, and I had no idea that I had suppressed so much of childhood trauma, so much of expectation of myself, expectation of what other people had blanketed on me. And in those entrepreneurial endeavors, I also had 2 kids under the age of 2 and had been married at that point for about 4 years, together for about 7. And I was coming home completely void and just hungry for something and had no idea of what that meant. This particular day where everything kind of shifted in my life was I pulled in and I had just finished nursing my daughter about after 9 months, and she was already waddling because she had a big brother to chase after, and I couldn't wait to pick her up. And my husband was outside talking to the neighbor. We had the white picket fence. We were the youngest in the neighborhood. We literally were called Barbie and Ken, and we took pride in that role. And when I got out of the car, my daughter looked at me, and instead of coming to me, she turned around and walked towards my husband.
Wow.
And I had a choice in that moment, right? I could have chased after her and made it into a game. But instead, I just grabbed my stuff and I went inside. And I remember feeling that essence of void for the first time, that wait, this isn't the life that I want to live. And I called it a tombstone moment, because I remember literally seeing a tombstone and being at this point, if I died today, my tombstone might say entrepreneur. But nobody's tombstone says entrepreneur.
Right.
And so if it was going to say what it was going to say, probably then too, they would have put child of God, but that wouldn't have been true. They would have put wife, but I wasn't a good one. And they would have put mom, and I wasn't really present. And so I just really had this massive check in my ego, in my spirit, and in my marriage where I wanted to lay it all down. And I could either be divorced and not with my kiddos, and this happens to a lot of homes. And finances is often one of the number one reasons that marriages fail. And I didn't want that to be the reason, and to know that I was acting out of flesh and not out of spirit. I refused to do it anymore. And ultimately, the biggest word, and this was something my husband was speaking into me, and this is something I hope that people are listening, take it for themselves. If you see someone who's walking around in this way, or maybe even you are that person in the mirror, is ask yourself, where is your integrity? And he kept saying, you're such a woman of integrity. I'm so grateful you have intact integrity. And he would say that before I'd leave the house. And I was in such a zombie mentality. I was like, what are you talking about? I totally wrote it off. And it wasn't until weeks later where I realized, after a supernatural encounter with the Lord, that I was walking outside of integrity, and I didn't even know what the definition of integrity was. Who teaches integrity?
Right.
How do you get equipped in integrity when you're little? And so that's something since then my husband and I have been very intentional with our own kids and just walking out a life of integrity. And I said play before, and play and integrity don't necessarily go together, but I think that they do, and we're called into childlike faith. And so to not take ourselves so seriously, and to get into the messy paint and color outside the lines, and yet do so under integrity, allows your life to have a totally different canvas than what the world is teaching these days.
It's amazing. Number one, when I'm interested, I mean, you used a lot of great words, and you painted a very, very, very vivid picture, and your ability to recognize a moment in time, and then do something about it. Can you walk through because sometimes things can happen in an instant, but sometimes things take time to germinate and come to fruition. Can you explain a little bit what that, from seeing a tombstone, having a radically real realization, have a radically real encounter with the Lord, and then making a decision to do something, and to walk in integrity, or walk in faith, or walk in an abiding nature towards something? What was that initial process like for you, and what was happening inside of you when that started?
It's interesting, and I don't know if you have a similar connection point to your own life, but I find that things often happen in the natural before they happen in the supernatural. And a year prior to this scenario happening, we had broken down all the walls in our house and done a total remodel. We have that open floor concept. It was a 80s home. It just now is wide open. And I remember when I went to go decorate again, I had 0 walls to put anything on. I couldn't put my little knickknacks that I had accumulated over the years. Any corner cubby, it wasn't there. And I remember realizing that I was constantly seen. There was no space in the corners to kind of have a little barricade, have a little silence, even from my kiddos who were, racing around on their little things. There was the playroom was the whole room.
Wow.
And in that fast forward year, when I looked back on it, that's exactly what I had to do with my husband. It's exactly what I had to do. Let's even put my hubby to the side, myself. I had never been alone with myself with no walls. And in my adult self, I should say, in the maturity of myself. And so I went on a self-exploration journey. And I know you're huge into the personal development world and understanding the power of mental health. That was the first time I ever went to therapist. And we were going twice a week, every week, one by myself, one with my spouse. I had never done work like that before. I also was a personal trainer and nutritionist back in my early 20s. Gymnast for 16 years. So that competitive nature was inside of me. And I remember not being able to brush my teeth in the mirror for about 30 days.
Wow.
I couldn't look at myself. I felt completely lethargic, apathetic, almost disgusted, truly, with myself and with the life that I had created. I still brush my teeth, people, so don't go there. I love my teeth. But I would brush my teeth, and I would just remember feeling so downcast about who I was physically, who I was emotionally was something I was breaking down all of the walls. Who I was relationally, I had no sense of intimacy with myself or with anyone I was connected to. I literally just felt like a ghost. I felt like I was just existing. And so when I went through the mental health development and doing that, I did that for 3 years. I also started reading personal development books that I had never read before. And in that encounter with the Lord that I mentioned earlier, I went on a radical 3-year investigation on who is God. And through that exploration, I found out who I was. Because when you know who your maker is, you know that you're an essence of said maker. And I was not raised in a broken home by any means, but my parents didn't have their own wherewithal of their identity. Mental health wasn't a conversation. It was sweep it under the rug, right? The elephant's in the room and everyone knows it, but we just keep it over there. And so eventually, I had taken down all the walls of myself, and I was completely wide open with everything that I was learning, even with friends and family. And it was really uncomfortable for people. And it still is, honestly. But in that journey, I realized that there's power in that vulnerability. And we hear people speak about authenticity and vulnerability so easily now. But are they doing it with no walls? Have they taken off their mask fully and found out that mentally, emotionally, relationally, physically, we don't exist in chasms. We don't exist in cyclones. All of those things are meant to be integrated. And so that 3-year exploration was a time of disintegration so that I could abide and be integrated with my Creator.
You do a lot of work with a lot of people. You teach, you educate, you empower. Going through that yourself, and being open to having no walls physically in a home, and physically with you and invisibly with you. Most people would be afraid of being found out or afraid of something. Was there any fear? What do you think stops most people from, once they realize what the issue is, to then actually go and do something about it? How did you work through any fear or anxiety or doubt that you had that clearly now has flipped to joy and fulfillment? And knowing who you are and whose you are.
It's a great question, and something that is constantly brought up. Like, even when people ask specific questions like this, I can feel that like nature where I want to go back to that corner, because it's easier for us to do that. And I've found that my best seasons of life have been when I'm growing, not when I'm stagnant and not when I'm scared. And so this is something I see as a commonplace, it's an element of shame. That's what it is. It's like you aren't good enough and you are trying to cover yourself up to become something else. And I ended up writing a book, and I told my brother this literally just last night, because he was talking about a past trial and a past mistake and how he was going to present that to these new employers. And he ended up walking in integrity. I was so proud of him, and making a really hard decision to share. And when we share and we get seen by other people, we often think that there's going to be a backlash of negativity, or that they're going to judge us, or that they're going to, you could think of 1,000 other ideas of what could potentially go wrong. And I chose to do it opposite. What if I shared my story? What if that story unlocked other people? What if my shame sits on a shelf rather than sits inside of my gut or on my shoulder or in my mind? What would that do from an empowerment perspective for other people, and most importantly, for me and my family? And so now, if anyone ever like that comes to be, I'm like, oh, you can just read it. It's all right there, people. So I love storytelling, and I love people to go down that journey for themselves. It took me 3 years to write that book, and now I can bust out a book in a weekend because the shame has been unlocked, and no one can hold that over me. And I really hope that as people get inside of my community and I get to meet new people, and I don't even care if it's a DM, when someone sends me something raw and real, I first off just want to pray over them so that they can find immediate freedom and release, and to know that they're not alone. But ultimately, I want to encourage them to just go deeper, because you've heard a lot about limiting beliefs, right? Yes. This is common thread. I had this revelation even just this summer that limiting beliefs are actually still surface level, and that there is a root connected to every limiting belief. And I think it's sin. And I think people are shameful because they're walking in sin, and they project it as a limiting belief because the personal development world has said, oh, that's okay that you have fear of success. That's okay that you have fear of failure. That's okay that you think that you're unworthy. Or that's okay. You know, we've blanketed it as blanket statements that are okay. And ultimately, I was walking in sin. And so I had to learn, how do I bear all and be okay with being corrected? And that's also something I think people are terrible at.
Yeah, 100%. Along that path as you're going through that, I mean, yeah, getting down to the roots and really digging into what's really down there. You said that you went on this 3-year basic exploration or, inquisitive search about who God is. What did you realize, or who is God to you?
Wow, that's a deep question. The first year, the way in which I did that was I got enrolled in a school called Burn 24/7. And it's a worship school. You might know Let Us Worship movement with Sean Foyt, some incredible teachers. Sean Boltz is a part of it. And it was the first time I ever felt called. You know that feeling where you're like, I have to do that. I have zero idea why. I just have to do it. And I did it through a Pentecostal church. And so I went to like normal, I call it white people church, and I don't mean it ethnically, but people know what white people church is, okay? You open a hymnal, no one raises their hands, no one's dancing to the music, everyone is smiling, and they just got in a fight in the car before they got there, and they actually hate their life, but they're coming to check a box, okay? That was my version of church growing up. And we were Creasters, so we went to church on Christmas and Easter. And that was pretty much it, okay? So I didn't have...
A lot of Creasters in the world.
Totally. I just didn't have depth. And so when I first went, me and my husband, we were in this chasm, this place, we called 11 churches that were in our vicinity. And we ended up going to this church that was 35 minutes away, and we knew no one. And when I walked into this Pentecostal church, I had like 20 aunties immediately who just like barricaded me in their chest. They didn't care who I was. They didn't care where I came from. They didn't care that I was a Creaster. They didn't care that I was walking in sin. They just loved me. So I encourage people, one, to go to churches outside of their local community for that reason. And then I also encourage people to sit in those places and see where you're called, because you'll be called in a different way, in a different spectrum than you ever had been. One of the ways that I was called was into this worship school. I am not a musician. And, well, I shouldn't say that. I don't want to like limit God. God, I'm a musician. Okay. I will play the ukulele when I'm in heaven.
I love music. I love live
too.
Music, but I know I'm musically uninclined.
There we go.
Yes.
There we go. I'm not a singer. So I get inside, there's hundreds of people in this school, and they're all like telling in their bio statement, like you kind of read off mine, I am a worship leader at such and such, such and such. I was like, oh, I just became a Christian, I think, and I don't play any instrument and I don't sing. And everyone was so perplexed by that. But I found in that year alone, so much about God is who we think we're not. Because it's actually exactly who we are. And so what I mean by that, without it sounding wildly poetic, is that I didn't think I was a worshiper, and I found out that I was a worshiper, that God made us to worship, and that my essence of worship is different than what their essence of worship was. But I am a poet, I'm a songwriter, I'm a dancer, and that honors God just as much as the frontline mic and musician does, right? Mm-hmm. The next 2 years, I went through an ordination and leadership program, and that was at my church. And I just found out the concepts of like the spiritual world, the spiritual realm. I had no idea about the demonic realm, no idea about. I realized that God was, and is to come. And that has changed my life, because it's changed what I said connected to play. It's changed my present moment. I am not striving to be somewhere or to get access into heaven. Like, I can have that communion right now. And I hope that other people who are listening like explore, because God wants us to seek, and we will find.
And so, how did you take that and like the past of what you were doing and how you were building businesses then, to then going through this transformative process and re-identifying who you really are and where you really belong and who and what God created you to be. How did that then, what happened to the businesses over here, and then what happened
Yeah.
3 years later, and then we'll get to where you are now. But what I'm interested in what
Yeah,
happened with
that
the
3 years
businesses,
was
the 9
crazy.
businesses,
Yeah.
the 2.
So the 2 that were actually successful, I ended up selling one of them to my mom, who has since sold and done her own thing.
Okay.
The other one I let go of. I literally released. It was a 9-figure contract. I took the Australian nursing bra that was the #1 nursing bra there, and I brought it to the American market, and we brought it to the English and the Canadian markets, and so I redesigned it, and then we brought that out. Still like so passionate about product development and businesses. And I remember about 2 years into this time frame, and I also understand as people are thinking about this and I quit those businesses, it sounds like I just like took a hiatus on life. Yeah. And I actually did, except for I became a stay-at-home mom, which is the hardest job anyone could ever have. I felt like I lost my identity already. And then I was like, what? I'm supposed to do this every day? I'm like a great crafts person. I'm awesome at Pinterest. I love doing all the things, but it just wasn't for me. So I did still, even in the exploration of God, I still felt that void. And I remember 2 years in, and we're sitting out back, and my husband, like, he's cool as a cucumber. I can't wait for you to meet him. He's like always barefoot. He just has this like peace about him, such a good listener. And he's just like cattily, like just sits back and he's like, hey, babe, what are you passionate about? And I had nothing to say. And his eyes kind of got big, and he's like, we just spent our life savings. You're not passionate about all that stuff. And I just was silent. I said, I don't think so. He said, okay, like who did I marry? What are we going to do now?
What are we doing next?
I couldn't place in the midst of all of that a job title to myself. I couldn't place networking, shake my hand, this is who I want to be. I didn't have dreams in that moment. I was just really trying to be present. And so when he said, what are you passionate about? I processed it for a minute, and I said, I think at the end of the day, I'm just really passionate about people. I just love people. I love to encourage people. I love to see them activated. I love to see them not in this place of a rat race and a rat wheel, and just really having those light bulbs go off to say, like, I am made for this. I am made for more. And so about that time, I was starting to take girlfriends out to eat. I was finally able to like be out in public normally. I literally felt like I just had a lot of dissection that had to happen. And so there was a lot of internalization. And once you do that work, you can effectively go out and be with people wholesomely and with that sense of integrity I mentioned. So I was going to lunch with people. I was going to coffee dates with people. And this one particular girl, I was just extracting. I love to just like pull out of people, like, tell me more. What else aren't you doing? What else do you want to do? Where are you feeling complacent in your life right now? And she's like, Tamra, you should do this. And I'm like, do what? What am I going to do? And she's like, you should be a coach. And I had zero idea about the coaching industry. No idea. Even the therapy realm I just mentioned to you, I knew nothing about it. So even though I read self-help books, I didn't know that was a thing. And so I said, that would be really fun. So I did something within about a month time frame, because I am an activator. I'm like, give me an idea. Let's go. Let's massage it. Let's play with it. It might not always work. Obviously, if I started that many businesses, you know that I'm just willing to like put the work in. And so I gathered about 31 women. I sent them text messages on the new year of 2019. And I brought all of them into my husband's office, and I gave them, I love surprises. I pretty much just said, be there or be square, right? Like, we're no longer friends if you can't be in this room. I see something great in you, and I want to share a new opportunity. Wow. And the very first thing that I did was open Proverbs 31. And we read about the Proverbs 31 woman. And I asked everyone, do you feel like this woman? Or do you want to be this woman? And everyone raised their hands. And I said, I knew that was the case. I already recognized this inside of you. And I want to invite you on an adventure to extract those pieces of who you are and build them into a business. And at the time, other than network marketers or DLM, MLMs, direct level marketing, there was no entrepreneurs in the room. I just knew that they had entrepreneurial qualities. And so for the next 2.5 years, we met twice a month, and we started building businesses. In 2020, these new like stay-at-home moms, side hustles, whatever you want to call it, we had earned over $250,000 in 4 months in COVID, which for us, that's like, that was a wild moment. And so I just kept saying yes. I started building a podcast from there. I started writing my book at that point. The membership took off and the individual coaching sessions took off. And I realized like, this is what I'm made for. And how it develops, it's been crazy. There's been a publishing house that's started since then. I run retreats and conferences. I started a nonprofit since then. And I just take it and I just say, hey, what can we do today? How can we make it fun?
Right.
And that's the biggest thing is that business building, it's so in school and business school is so like serious.
Yes.
And the business plans were huge. And now I'm just like, let's go. You got an idea? Let's build it.
Right.
And there's a lot of strategy and systems and things that go into that I geek out on as well. But overall, it's about the person. It always goes back to the person.
What is Proverbs 31 woman?
Gosh, she wakes
I'm
up.
asking as a man. But
Yeah,
what is,
she
what is
wakes
that?
up before her home. This is like literally her day. Like she wakes up before her home. She is making and creating and using her hands. She has multiple streams of revenue. She plays in real estate. She plays in the marketplace. She exists and takes care of like making clothes for her kids, making food for her home. She sends her husband out for his own work day. And so basically it's like the best mom, wife, entrepreneur blended into one, and it's right in the Bible. And so I think a lot of moms, especially stay-at-home moms, they feel like ill-equipped to do more, or they feel like I can't possibly do something else. And it just gives us a freedom pass to say whatever you're passionate about, you're capable of.
And how did you find that seed inside the Bible?
Oh man, there's a Proverbs 31 Ministries nonprofit that I started following during that time, and she's a multiple best-selling author as well. She really just equips women to stand in purpose and to study the Word. That was the first time in my life I had ever actually read the Bible, like the way that I was reading it now, for that essence of fruit rather than just a checkbox. And I want to live my life like that. Like I now, every time I read the word, I want to extrapolate, how can I put that into my life? I want to live in a spirit of conviction. We talked about King Solomon before we got on in here today. I'm like, what can I learn from King Solomon that I can apply to my life? It's Joseph. It's Job. I felt like Job during that season. There's like family warfare that was happening. I had to learn about boundaries, and I had to learn about getting into the gym again with a whole new body image after having the revelation during that time. For those of you who are like, what happened? There had to be more than just she decided to quit her job. I realized that I had suppressed unconsciously a sexual trauma that happened when I was 3. And that played out in my life in so much chaos. And alongside what the world was presenting on that time was pornography and sexualization of women and magazines and MTV music videos and AOL and chat rooms and cybersex and all these things. And so I had to redevelop myself as a woman. So when I think of the Proverbs 31 woman, I think about that woman of integrity. And I think that she is clothed in dignity and strength, and she laughs without fear of the future.
Wow.
That's Proverbs 31:25.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How do you infuse that into business and the way that you are? So it's so oftentimes people have a very difficult time. Sometimes like my faith is over here, my business is over here.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm the little box checker on Sundays.
Yeah.
I sing the songs, I say the prayers, I go and I get my hour of feeling good.
Yeah.
And then the next day, Monday, I go back into the grind of the workplace, or I do things, and the identity that I may feel on the weekend may be different than the identity I feel as soon as I go into work. How have you been able to understand who God is, understand who the Lord is, understand who you are inside of that, and bring that into business?
Yeah, it's so good. I take it under the play of fashion because I love fashion. I just launched a hat line recently.
Really?
And it's that we don't actually wear multiple hats. Like right now, you're not wearing more than one hat. And you might feel that way sometimes, but that is the element of disintegration. That tells me that a part of you is showing up as a father. Another part of you is showing up as a spouse. Another part of you is showing up as a business person. What if you wore one hat because God is present with us as God, the entirety of God at one given time? He doesn't segment himself. He is both awe and wonder. He is both fear and strength as much as he is calm and compassion. And so if we show up in that entirety, that totality of self, we become so powerful. We show up in all of our authority. There's a presence that is known when you're in the room. But if I show up in my marriage differently than I show up on stage, what does that say about my integrity? And so the people who are struggling because they feel like they can't put their faith in their business because there's a separation of church and state, right? Or my arena, my office places, and my corporate arena is so I cannot talk about faith. You don't have to talk about faith to be about faith. And so that is this diagram that the Lord gave me is being, brand, and then business. And a lot of us go after business first because we're looking to finances, we're looking to fame. We go after brand next because we're looking about image and we're trying to create what we think the world wants us to be. And then we kind of just put being to the side, like we'll do that at church, right? Like God will see me then, that's good, I checked my box. But what if you shifted it? What if identity and being and the essence of who you are came first, and that took you into the building of your brand so that people are like, whoa, when I see all those colors that Tamra has, it evokes interest, it evokes emotion, and that emotion is joy, that emotion is fun, that emotion is play, and then we build businesses out of that place. So then people are attracted without you having to formulate an attraction system. They're just curious. And so that's really what I tell people now is like, be about your faith. Stop trying to like wear a cross and think that that's the only thing that you can do in this setting. Like just be love and see how people respond to you.
It's amazing. And what have you realized as you do that, as you walk in that with your being of who you are, and you walk into business, you walk into writing, you walk into speaking, you walk into interviewing, where you're pulling things out of people, you walk into sharing on a stage. What have you realized, or what has happened that maybe you didn't expect to happen? Because obviously you have some idea of what you want to have happen, but what has happened along the way when you're walking in this faith? You're walking in your true identity. You're not hiding from anything. You're just being who you are already predestined to be anyways.
Yeah.
And what has happened that maybe you didn't expect to happen along this path?
I'd say I sleep really, really good. I think that's probably an unexpected answer, but I think I live every day completely full out with an expectation that God's going to show up. And it's through me sometimes, and sometimes it's through other people or through moments. I like to call them God winks. And so we're like, are we looking for the God winks in our life? A lot of people will call them coincidences, or, I was surprised by such and such. But whether good or bad, I think that the winking from heaven is that he is present and we are present in that moment, because I caught it. But when I was living so supersonic, I was sleeping terribly because I was out of integrity. I was not healthy physically in the way that I needed to be. My mind was a battlefield every single minute of every single day. And I don't say all of that to say I'm in perfect place. Literally the words to my book is always becoming. Every day we have an opportunity to become who Christ intends for us to be. And we get to do that by being present. And so I found the scripture that says that you are the head and not the tail to be one of the most important things that I remain in alignment over. Because even when I go into the social media world, let's say I'm going to make a video on social media, for a long time I struggled with, do I talk about my faith? Am I a Christian business coach? I mean, I had people in my masterminds were like, don't say that, because immediately they're going to think, what kind of Christian are you? Is she a Bible thumper? Is she a Pentecostal? Is she Baptist? Like, I don't know. I don't even follow denominations. I don't think about those things. I'm a Jesus follower. But I think now, after doing it over and over and over again and becoming comfortable in that place, it's the number one reason people come to me. They're like, I love how you display your faith so openly. And if more people did that, the ultimate essence is love, because that's who we're created to be. The world would be a better place. And so that's really the point, is to be the example for other people, to get curious enough to find out how to love themselves so that they can love other people. We talk about business being an act of service for other people. We should be starting businesses for other people. If you're out of alignment there, that's a whole nother episode. But when I show up fully in that space of how am I going to love today, some days I am emboldened by that. Some days it feels like the weight of the world is on my shoulders, and I feel tired, and I feel weary, and I feel downcast, and I feel sad, because when you walk in love, have a new lens for empathy and compassion. And because I walked through what I did and I had to break down those walls, there were moments when those walls were broken down where I was in a construction zone that looked like chaos. And I see that so quickly in people now that I can go into new arenas with people, secular or not. And I go and I get to teach a lot of different people. My one goal, my only goal, is for them to leave loved. And so it's simple, and yet it's complicated, because the emotional roller coaster that ties in to being someone in faith, of faith, walking by faith every day is real. It's not, there's a steadfast love, but that doesn't mean that our emotions aren't constantly at play by an enemy tactic, and also our desire to just lay it all down and be surrendered. Living a life surrendered is really living a life of love.
I mean, there's so much what you just laid down right there that that was very, very, very well articulated and very, very real. And there's a couple things I want to ask you about as you're walking through that, because I think it was just extremely enlightening what you're talking about. Number one, you used the word compassion. Used a word like weary and a burden. You rest well, but there's also weariness in it. Some people struggle with rest. You know, especially if you're a hard-charging person, or you want to go get things done, or you're like, I want to build a business. I found myself. I found my identity. I want to go do something. How do you make it okay to be in rest, even though you have dreams and aspirations? You have a destiny that you're chasing after, number one, and then I want to ask you about compassion after that.
Yeah. So I get this a lot, and I'm sure you do too, is like about your pace or your speed or your adrenal glands or your burnout factor or all of these pieces. Rest is an active word, and people assume that rest is stillness. And stillness is also an active word. To be still is a state of being. It's what my soul is doing. I could be running a marathon and still be resting.
That's wild.
And that is not what people assume. And so that's really what I want people to unlock in that is that you have to still move. God never says, like, sit there and don't move and consume my word. There might be moments where I'm in my Bible chair and I'm like, this is good, this is great. But immediately upon that, I am activating the word. And so that be still and to rest is active. And that is something that Christians, and I say this lightly, little c Christians, can be complacent in. And because they're like, oh, I'm just going to pray about it. One day I'll jump into that dream. One day I'll step out of the boat. But right now I'm just going to be still and wait on God. Okay, waiting is still active. When you're waiting on something, it's to wait. It's in a verb. It's an action word. And so how are you waiting? Because if you're waiting well, in my opinion, you're doing something with that. You're starting something. Nothing will come from nothing. Something will always come from something. And whether it's exactly what the Lord had you intended to do or not, you're learning in the process, and that's where God shows up, is in the learning process.
You're using nouns and verbs, and I was a horrible English student.
Yes.
But I love to read now, which I didn't love to read in school. But someone did make me aware. That's why I was asking about the word compassion. That there's two
Yeah.
ways to live out the word compassion. One is as a noun, which means you're aware of something, but it doesn't compel you to do anything about it. I'm aware that there's hunger. I'm aware that
So
there's
good.
poverty. I'm aware that there's things out there, but it doesn't compel me to do anything. Versus compassion as a verb, which is how you were explaining it before, and even in rest as being active,
Yeah.
being still is active. How do you live out the word compassion as a verb, which means it compels you to get into movement that compels you to do something? How does compassion sit with you?
Yeah. My grandpa passed away earlier this year at 94, and he was not a believer, and he was an avid reader. I mean, he just had books around him all the time. And I wanted to ask him like all the final questions, right? And my kiddos were around, so I couldn't go into some of the history questions I could have asked or whatever. But one of the questions we asked was if you could essentially give anybody the key to life, like what do you believe is the key to living a life well? And he thought for a minute, and he was also a man of many words. Like he did the crossword puzzle and finished it every single day in the newspaper.
Wow.
Brilliant. He said compassion, and it shocked me. And I thought, wow, Grandpa, that was like the last thing, because he was a whippersnapper.
Yeah.
Compassion was not a word I would use to describe him. And then I thought about his life in an entirely new context after he told me that. And I thought, he really does have so much compassion for people. 6 kids, 30 plus grandchildren, 40 total with great grandchildren. I mean, just like he lived a life of compassion. And when I think about it connected to propel into action and it being that action word, it really is, it's the spark inside of you. There's a difference in being aware of something, and then there's a difference in it sparking and ignite inside of you. I am aware of a lot of things that I was not sparked to take action over. But if you have any sort of ignite and you don't take action, then you feel guilt and regret. And that's when you're out of integrity. And that's when you don't rest well, because you know that there's something that's been left unfinished. And so if compassion is the true key to life, as Grandpa says, then I think we need to do more about the things that ignite us than less. And so that's why I'm so passionate. People have called me a purpose activator. And that's because I don't let you sit on your dream. I'm not going to let people do it. I refuse to live my life and let people sit on their dream.
That's amazing. What are you most excited about right now in what you're doing with people, igniting people? And
Yeah, gosh. I think storytelling in a whole nother lens. We have a publishing house. And so, like I said, when I was able to put that book on a shelf, it freed me. It freed me so much, and it's also freed so many people alongside me. And so I wanted other people to be freed by writing their story, but I also know that it's going to have a ripple effect to free others. So I would say writing books and getting their message out to the masses.
And what do you love about that process when a lot of people will be like, I just want to write my story.
Yeah.
I just want to figure my story out, get mine right.
Yeah.
What do you enjoy, or what gives you joy about giving other people permission to share their story?
I think it goes back to that mental health journey that I went on, was that I actually got to have a breath and a beat to extrapolate what is my reason for being. Have you ever heard of the word ikigai?
No.
Okay, this is a Japanese word called reason for being. And you know about blue zones?
Yes.
Okay, so this is one of the blue zones where they explored in the blue zone of the healthiness factor and the longevity. People are living on average 120 years old. Like, why in this place in Japan are they living this long? This is Okinawa. And they said it's our ikigai. We know our ikigai. And I'm like, what does that mean? I'm probably saying it
Is
wrong.
he an ikigai?
An ikigai. And it's not an icky guy, because that would be a shame if that's why they live to the 120. So it's called the reason for being, which means it's their purpose. And it's actually like a 4-pronged Venn diagram that tells you that you understand what you love, what you're passionate about, what the world needs, and where you can make money. And so you bring all of those places together and you find out your purpose. And that is your reason for being. And so these people have unlocked that place. And so when I think about that for people here in America, I'm like, what is your ikigai? Like, what is the thing that you're passionate about, you love, other people, the world needs, because that's the service element, and that you can monetize so that you can live a life of fruit. And fruit isn't just money, but it is one essence of you being able to propel the kingdom ultimately.
In in that process, there's someone's trying to pursue something.
Yeah.
They have a passion. Some people have a hard time trying to figure out what their passion is, or they feel like they have a purpose.
Yeah.
Obviously, then struggle comes, and all the doubt or fear or worry and anxiety comes in. But helping other people and allowing that to become the seed that goes out into the world. And what do you think allows some people to do it what appears effortlessly sometimes versus other people that appears that it's always a struggle?
Yeah.
Is it because they're not really in their purpose or their passion, or is it what is your experience in working with
Recently, I was
people?
in a conversation with someone, and I told him, I'm like, wow, you just slapped me in my face, and my husband's not going to come kill you. Because it literally felt, it was just a brother who was just like, boom, I got to tell you something. And I said something just super loosely out of my mouth. And I think this is where it starts. You talked about planting seeds. Our words have matter. They're taking up airspace as we are reverberating energy into the world by our words. And oftentimes we are speaking negatively. And we sometimes don't even know it because it's so habitual, and it's also projected on us all the time. This fear that you're speaking of, this lack of action mentality, the worry element, the rejection, all of these things have been spoken over us since we were little, and therefore we have, like a sponge, we've equipped ourselves under this lack mentality, and or it's now become a part of our routine language. So I said something about money and bringing something to fruition. It was in context to the conference that we're about to put together. And he stopped me right there. He said, do I have permission to tell you something? And I'm like, yeah, let's go. So I hope that the listeners, I have permission to tell you, because you're listening to this on your own accord, so no offense taken. But if your emotion is a negative emotion, you have bowed to a false idol. And I thought, whoa. He said, your emotion is telling me that you are bowed to basically the devil, the enemy. And I thought, like, punch in the gut, sword to the spirit, like, what? And he was totally right. Because essentially it had gotten in my mind that I wasn't able, and that this was a lack mentality. This is the poverty mentality that the church has. And so when I now have any thought pattern, I think, who am I bowing to? Because you only can bow to one thing at a time. I cannot bow here and bow here.
Right.
And I was forever changed. I was just last week. And I every time I have an emotion, I go, who am I bowing to?
Wow.
And it's just a gut check. So moving forward, for the people who are like, what variability? Now, with my empathy, I just go, oh, they're just bowed to the wrong idol. They're just bowed to something that is either out of their control or an enemy tactic.
And then how did you shift it? So I mean, once
It was
once you
almost
know it,
immediate. Like,
it seemed like it.
It was, oh man, it really was almost immediate. I thought, whoa, first off, tame my tongue. Right? And be really mindful of the things that you're saying. This is where we know we're supposed to be better listeners than we are speakers. Tame my tongue was one. And then two, if out of the heart your mouth speaks, then I need to be constantly putting in. This is why people talk about affirmations and gratitude practices. They're not wrong. This is very applicable and critical. And so what is it that you're simmering on? If you're simmering on your negative emotion, then why in the world would you stand up to do something that is a positive action? Right. And so we've got to create that momentum in our life of positivity and of movement. And so I don't ever want to be caught in the cesspool that's growing all of the jargon and mess. I am in moving water all the time. That's why I love the ocean. I never feel fear next to the ocean. I feel invited into that expression of chaos. And we live in a world that is not calm, and yet we have the ability with our emotions, if we can get them in check, to remain calm, which is to be still and to rest, even when we feel all of those heavy emotions.
So who do you lean on, or it's a personal question more than who do you lean on, or how do you personally deal with it? Because I think sometimes people think it's got to be a long struggle in order to do something, when sometimes it can be the realization can be fast, and the anecdote to it can be equally fast. But what do you how do you personally move through it? Once you're aware of it, how
Yeah.
do you move into self-management to get rid of it?
Yeah, I think there's always a research element, and I think we should constantly be learning and researching not only ourselves, but what does someone else who's gone before me say about it. And so I think that's why I am such an advocate for learning and resourcing podcasts and resourcing books and resourcing pastors, and also tuning into what the people that I trust the most around me say. My husband is like such a steadfast human soul. I just love him so much, but he is also my biggest business mentor, and he's gone before me in his own entrepreneurial endeavors about 7 years. And so specifically when it comes to business, which is where my biggest ailing point would be of being rocked, because when you're in the marketplace, not everyone has the same belief systems that I do, and I have been affected by shiny light syndrome, right? Like I love disco balls, and so I'm like, let's go there. That sounds fun. Let's do this. Let's dance. And I have to laser that focus in, and him being that steadfast. Anytime something wild happens, like this year, I dealt with financial issues I've never had. I dealt with lawyer and issues. I've never experienced that side of business. I dealt like the legality side. I had never dealt with some team development issues that have happened where I've lost team members because they've gone off to start their own businesses, which is I now realize I didn't lose them. I launched them.
Yes.
Language,
Yes.
right? Either lack mentality and so now I'm counting how many businesses I've launched rather than how many employees have left.
Yes, big difference.
Huge difference. So I go to him and I realize that my problems and the way that I perceive things always comes back to that kick up his feet, what you're passionate about question. He says he smirks when something hard happens to me and I'm like weary and frustrated and I want to like, give me a right answer,
Right.
tell me what to do, fix my problem. And he just looks at me, he smirks and he says, good. Because if we are called to serve people and we're not willing to go through the fire first, then what are we actually doing? And that stagnancy will keep the people who are you're leading, who are following you, away from the same fire. And that is blocking not only your blessing, it's blocking their blessing and the legacy connected to who they are. So I now, in the essence of play, and I say now, I mean, this is conversations that happened last week, right? It's a constant now. It's always becoming. I am like, okay, there's a fire. What is my lens on this fire? It could be negative or it could be an opportunity. And if there's a fourth man in the fire, I'm going in, right?
That's right.
So let's run.
That's
But it's a
awesome.
process. I think if anybody ever says that they've figured it out, I want to sit at their feet. And I just think learning. I'm constantly willing to learn, which is, again, an action word.
Yes, action. Speaking of action, what's next for you, for your business?
Yeah.
Are you writing another book or wrote another book?
I am. I'm in the process of actually co-authoring a book with my husband called The Alabaster Jar.
Wow.
And it's essentially just about what it looks like to pour out your entire life and for it to be replenished supernaturally in all chasms of health, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. We live a life called Lights on Love. And that's like the most intimate space you can be with someone is just like lights on. And I want more people to live that kind of life. And so I'm really excited about that one because my husband is not one for the stage. He's still never been on my podcast 6 years later. I make him
Maybe
sometimes
this
go on
year,
stage.
maybe. He's got to come on to talk about the book.
Well,
I mean,
he won't even say it's
okay.
co-authored.
Oh.
He's like, can you just put your name? And
Ghostwriter.
it's yes. He's hilarious, which I love him for his humility because it truly is not false humility. But the other thing is we started a nonprofit. This past year associated to the way that we serve marketplace ministers. And we've been doing a weekly, essentially mobilized church for entrepreneurs.
Wow.
And so that has me mind blown by the Lord.
Explain to me what that is.
You're like, you need this,
I'm
you need
like,
this, come, you need this.
wild.
So we gather every Wednesday, midweek, noon.
Wow.
It's not a checkbox because it's something you have to be very intentional about and nobody else is going to hold you accountable to that lunch hour except for you. And all the people that now know that you should be there. But it's co-run by a multitude of pastors, specifically me and another pastor, and the microphone is everyone's. And it's a common table for communion. It's how I really believe the church is supposed to operate. The pulpit has kind of gotten out of place in a lot of places. And while we're still guiding and we still have an essence of spiritual wisdom there are so many more people who have wisdom in areas I have never touched and had placement for. And so we allow people to come and share true entrepreneurial issues. It could be personal as well, but it's team dynamics, it's leadership problems, it's financial flow, it's all of these conversations that we should be having all the time, but we don't really have a safe space to do it.
Wow.
And so we've been doing that since January of this year. And just to see the fruit that's come from the people, it's my truest honor of all the things that I'm working on right now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How can people find more about you or from you or follow you, or where do they go?
I hang out on Instagram probably most, and I'm in my DMs there the most as well. We've got all the websites, tamra.andress.com. Fit and Faith Media is my actual for-profit, and then Founder Collective is our nonprofit.
And what does Fit and Faith mean?
So Fit and Faith was where all of that business, that one that I mentioned about the Proverbs 31 women that came to that table, I immediately had started my podcast at that point, which is called Fit and Faith. And it was what my book was supposed to be called until God wrecked it at the very last chapter. Thanks, Lord. I wanted it to all be in symmetry, because Fit and Faith means so much to me, because I was physically fit my whole life, and I had no essence of spiritual fitness, mental fitness, emotional fitness, all of fitness, every other health element that you could have. And so when I went on that exploration journey, I just wanted to start a podcast to have curious questions and ask other people who I felt like had done it and had walked through something that I wanted to learn from. So that was through my podcast is where I learned how to walk with a spirit of desired conviction. Because every conversation we would pray before, and I would just ask the Holy Spirit, God, show me a way that I can become. Show me a way that I can become more fit in who I'm meant to be. And that's actually one of the reasons I stopped drinking like 4.5 years ago, was a podcast conversation that then, God wink, later that afternoon, my son asked me a question, and it was associated to the wine that I was drinking and selling. So I stopped drinking wine while I was also a wine sales rep. So God will have you do crazy things. But as Fit and Faith emerged, it now is an acronym, and FIT stands for Founders, Innovators, and Trailblazers, all of which have biblical context, because we're found in Him, which is Ephesians 2:19. Our innovation is the essence of our creativity, which is us being of His creation, and Trailblazers is all the pioneers that are out there doing what God's called them to do.
That's amazing. I just want to ask you one last question, because you said you walk in the spirit of
desired conviction. Yeah.
And what does that mean?
It means I want to be better. It means that I know I'm not whole. It means that I know that I'm still broken and imperfect, and in Christian context, still a sinner. And yet I don't have to live by that identity. I get to walk in freedom. I can walk in holiness. I am covered in righteousness. And so where in my flesh do I need to become better so I can match who I am in my spirit?
It's been an absolute honor. Desired conviction. Before you go, we're starting a trend.
Oh, yay.
On this table, it mimics my suitcase, which has stickers on it from everywhere.
Let's go.
Everyone that comes can find a spot on the table to put your autograph or a saying, and then you place it anywhere.
I'm going to do it. This is fun.
Your own desired conviction.
That's totally, I'm going to do it. I'm going to write that exactly. Desire conviction. All right.
Find your spot.
Got it.
Right there.
Right here.
Perfect.
Don't go live until you've asked the question.
That's
how are you going to change today?
Yeah. How are you going to change today? Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
And until next time, always ride the wave of life and always play big.